Good morning. Today is February 20th, 2023. This is episode 7 of the Freedom Farming and Living podcast. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about a situation occurred here on the homestead. We have a miniature donkey. He is a livestock guardian animal for us. We have him with our sheep right now. He's been with our cows and some of our goats before. But right now he's with our sheep. And unfortunately, last week, right after I did the last podcast, found a dead mama sheep. Her neck was broken, and she was inside, along with all the other sheep, inside of a poultry net, actually, half poultry net, half goat sheep net, along with the other 20 ewes and a few lambs and our ram, as well as the miniature donkey. So we have had a situation in the past with our 2 buck goats that we had with the miniature donkey, where one of them kept just aggravating him. Like I saw him, he was just jumping all over him and just really aggravating him. And so I did see him grab him by the neck and kind of shake him off a little bit. So the assumption was that was just him kind of defending himself against the buck jumping all over him, being all up in his business. Now, evidently, that may not have been the case. That very well could have been the case in that instance, but that wasn't the end of it. Now that we have had him over there with all the sheep, find this the sheep with her neck broke. She was still alive when I got over there, so I immediately dispatched her and brought her. This is across the street of the property we have across the street, so brought her over here, set up the gambrel, and processed her. Got her in the fridge. I broke her down to where she'd fit in our fridge. We don't have a large walk-in or anything like that, so I had to break her down into primal portions, into basically 3 sections: front legs, hind legs, and then of course saddle in the middle. And so that allowed me to put her inside of our refrigerator that we use for basically kind of, I hate to say aging, but that's essentially what it is. Our rabbits, basically just given in that 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, depending on kind of what we got going on, for rigor to set out, kind of let the meat dry out some after being processed and being wet. And then of course, pack them up, throw them in the freezer. So I put her in there, got that taken care of immediately because I didn't, want the meat to go bad. It was actually a warm day. We've had so many cool days, and that day happened to be a day where it got up to 72 that day. So I didn't want to leave her hanging for long, so I went in and got her taken care of, got her in the refrigerator, went back across the street and moved him out from within the sheep, put him outside. Now, don't like the idea of him just continuously grazing all over, but had to get him out of there. There's not much to graze right now anyway. This is this old row crop area that we are trying to regenerate. So there's patches here and there of where we've bale grazed, and those bales are growing grass up. But this is one of those things I've talked about it before. This is a real long-term investment of our time over there. So anyway, so now he's separated from the flock, but he is still able to go completely 360 degrees around their paddock, which they are out in kind of the middle, almost the dead center of this pasture field that we have. So he can still protect them from coyotes, stray dogs. I mean, they would hopefully be protected by their electric netting, but I mean, let's be honest, if a coyote wants to jump over it, he's going to jump over it. So he's still providing protection. He just now doesn't have access to create harm or death. So obviously it's a rough week, rough day, and then rough week, because this was a nursing mama. Now, of course, at this point, the lambs are all, I think the youngest one is probably about a month old. Couldn't figure out which one was hers. There was no crying lamb. I mean, everybody seems to be doing great. They're all eating hay, so I think everything's fine. Another mama, we had some mamas that lost their lambs, so there's certainly other opportunities for that lamb to find a new mama, or share off of one of the other ones. But again, at this point, they're old enough. It would have been ideal for them to just keep on nursing, but they are eating hay, so I think everything's fine on that end. We haven't seen any issues with any, like I said, none walking around crying looking for their mama. So I think everything's fine on that end. Unfortunately, though, given the fact that she was a nurse and mama, all her feed is going into production. She's eating hay every day, and that hay is getting turned into milk. And trying to keep up her condition, which none are in bad condition, but just the natural situation when you have they're not dairy sheep, but they're producing milk. So after processing her, breaking her down, went through, she was really thin. I mean, she didn't have a lot of meat, in her ribs. There just wasn't a lot of meat in general. Her legs weren't real beefy. They were pretty thin. So her hind legs, of course, I did retain those as leg of lambs, of course. Decent size, but again, this is our first sheep, so I don't have a whole lot to compare it to, other than we have bought a lamb from another farm, received that lamb processed. I don't have a leg to lamb side by side and compare it to, and I certainly haven't processed one before. But I did know that she just seemed really small. Now, I've talked to some other people that said, yes, they don't get a whole lot out of theirs. And when you're grass feeding, that's obviously going to be the case. You're not going to have these big beefed up sheep. Plus, we don't have like a Dorper or a commercial breed. We have a mix. This was one of our wool hair sheep mixes. So it was part Gulf Coast native and part Barbados. So it'll be interesting to see with our Katahdins and our St. Croix ram, what we generate out of that, because the St. Croix is much smaller than the Gulf Coast native. So I don't know. It's one of those things we may, I'm not going to completely call it hopeless at this point, because she was a nursing mama. So I want to give the benefit of the doubt and see what one of our lambs that we're growing out actually generates. But for a full-grown ewe to only produce net, now this, we're talking net, this is 2 legs, so those were bone in, and the neck. Did keep the neck because it was a decent size, and it looked like it had a decent amount of meat on it. If nothing else, we use it for broth. And then we, of course, keep the organs, because we keep organs on all of our animals we process. So good size liver, kidneys, heart. So even with the 2 bone-in legs, the neck, and those organs, which the organs weighed a couple pounds, and everything else I ground, there was just not enough there in the shanks to really produce much of anything. There wasn't much on those front legs. So I just pulled everything off of them, pulled every scrap that I could get off of the ribs, including tenderloin, all that. They were so small. I mean, we're talking about loins, that tenderloin, a strip about that thin, and about that long. I mean, it was one of those things where I would have had to combine it with several other things to make a meal out of it for one person. It was very, very small amount of meat. So to simplify things and not have all this crazy packaging with so many ounces of I mean, we're talking about like 6 ounces or 4 ounces of tenderloin. Rather than do all that, I just ground everything. So that way we could have at least a decent amount of one product, which was, of course, the ground lamb. And we love the ground lamb. We use it. Like I said, we've bought a lamb before, used it, and a couple of different ways. Of course, lamb burgers, but a few other dishes that my wife has made that are really good. Some lamb bowls, and anyhow, so we're good with having that ground. Take everything and have it ground. Again, give us our 2 legs so we can we can make 2 meals out of that, or maybe just 1 meal for a few of us. And then the neck, like I said, we'll probably just use it in a broth along with the organs. But all told, we had 14 pounds total. That was 2 pounds of organs. So we had 12 pounds of meat, including the bone, the neck, and the 2 legs, and then all the ground. We ended up with, I believe we were about 7.5 pounds of ground, 7 to 7.5. I went a little over a pound on each one and had 6 bags of ground. So, yeah, even if you say 14 pounds, a guy in a group that I'm in mentioned that he had just done one and he netted 20 pounds off of it. So I believe the lamb that we got, and again, this was more of a commercial lamb, not completely 100% grass fed, but I think we got around 30 some odd, almost 40 pounds, like 36, 38 pounds out of it. So again, that wasn't a grass fed, it was grass fed, but also supplemented with grain. Not ideal, not something we want, not what we're doing. But for a comparison's sake, yeah, there's a lot of effort to get 12 pounds, even the 14 pounds with the organs. So we'll be really paying attention to what we generate out of the ram lambs that we have that we're going to feed out. We're going to retain one back so that we have a buddy for our ram that we have, so that when we separate, he's not by himself. He'll actually have a buddy with him. And then the rest, we'll retain any ewes that we have, which I think we only have maybe 1 or 2 ewes. And then the other lambs will just be feeders. We already have someone who wants one. Actually, probably 2 people. But sorry for the shaking. Got you on an unsturdy surface. And then, of course, the rest will go in our freezer. But I'm going to really pay attention to what we net on these ram lambs, because if we're not netting a whole lot, and again, they're coming out of winter. This was a mama that was nursing, eating not the highest quality hay. Hay's been such a hard thing to find at this time of the year after the drought issues that we had, and the monsoons that followed, and then the ice storm. It's just like one thing after another. So it's not like they've been out on, good spring fresh grass. Hopefully there will be a difference made with these ram lambs going out on spring grass. They're not there yet, but we're getting closer, getting up into these, warmer temperatures. We still drop off into the 30s every for a few days straight, and then we're back up to 40s, 50s. So anyhow, it was a rough day. That was a very rough day. And of course, we're facing the situation that the donkey's got to go. So keep y'all posted on that as we make more progress in that department. We do have a Great Pyrenees here around the house that keeps everything away from the chickens and the geese and turkeys. So we don't want to move her over there. So we are bringing on a new dog. It's an Anatolian Shepherd. He's a puppy though, so he's going to be a good ways off from taking care of the sheep. So we will train him up, and once he's old enough to take over the sheep, then at that time the donkey can go. But until then, we really want to make sure that we protect our flock, and so the best way to do that is with the donkey. Now, again, separated. So what I'm basically coming up with is to have the sheep inside their net, and then outside of their net, a single poly rope that basically creates a perimeter for the donkey to stay in. And just to give a little extra piece of information on that for anyone wondering, this is he's now 4-year-old intact mini donkey. So the intact may have had something to do with it. We did discuss this with a vet when she came over to check on our pigs and our goats, confirming some pregnancies there. And so she said that, that does happen. She had experience with a gelding that killed a baby calf. So even if they're not intact, you can still have an animal, grab them by the neck and break their neck, and it just happens. So anyway, hopefully things go really well with this new dog we're getting, and we can get him trained up. It's not going to be quickly, obviously, because again, he's a puppy. So we're going to have to do this separation of donkey and sheep. Kind of not super complicated moving, but it will obviously add some new dynamic to it, keeping this perimeter. But I do want to, he does a good job as far as, braying and keeping things away. So we're going to keep using him in that fashion as a perimeter guard. But once we're able to put the dog in there with him, and that works good, and we confirm that is working well, then we'll look at getting rid of the donkey. I considered maybe putting him with our dairy cow and her calf, but we don't want to run into the same issue of he gets a hold of a calf. Now, if the calf is older, when we get rid of when we would be getting rid of him once our dog is trained up and we feel comfortable with the dog being out there with the sheep, then at that point, maybe we keep the donkey with the cow. But the reality is I'm not really all that concerned about the cow. She won't be in a real wild area. She's right across the street. We can go over there every day. She's surrounded by a lot of cropland, and then on a highway, which is right across the street. So there's not a lot of concern. I don't see a bear going over there. Probably what I'll do is run a hot wire around the top of that fence, so at least it will prevent something from coming over, and that's probably all we need. And then we can just get rid of the donkey. Because as I'm saying this, I'm thinking the next time she calves, then we would have that concern about having to keep him separated from the calf. And I don't want to have to keep playing that game. If he's not going to do a good job protecting, then he needs to go. And so I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. But again, given the age of the puppy we're bringing on, I would think, I don't know, maybe by the end of this year, we might could see getting rid of him. Might not be the best time to try to get rid of a ruminant animal, in the winter. But I don't know. There's certainly when we were looking for him, it was not super easy. Mini donkeys were selling pretty quickly. And the reason we have a mini, he's a mini, but he's not a super mini. I mean, he's big. He's a big, strong animal. He's definitely big enough that I'm not worried about any coyotes. Obviously, if a bear came over there, it'd be a different story. But we only have black bears around here, and they don't frequent here very often. They typically are out by the woods, and there's some that are out in the cornfields and such, but they're going to be more apt to go after that than crawl over this fence to go after an animal. Again, given that they're black bears and not brown bears. So, just an update on that. It's one of those things that happens. It was actually a good experience. I will say this, that I was able to process that sheep. I'm not happy about that it happened, but I am happy that it was the first sheep I've ever processed. And I wouldn't say it went perfect, but it really wasn't that bad. I mean, I had to go get the gambrel out of the packaging. I had just bought the gambrel in anticipation of eventually going to be processing sheep here. Not to mention if something were to have happened to one of our goats, if it broke a leg or something like that, I didn't have a gambrel. I'd be having to try to do this on the fly, on a table or something, on the ground, and then using the table, and it just wouldn't have been good. So the gambrel was a long needed item. So I had bought it, but it wasn't even out of the packaging. So when this all happened, I had to, of course, kill the sheep, get the gambrel out of the packaging, set it up. I hadn't even completely worked out where I was going to set it up, so I did that on the fly as well, and it actually worked out pretty good. Underneath the covered area we have by our water and by the fridge that we use. So that probably will be our long-term use for it. It's still hanging there, so if something were to happen, it's already set up. So I think that's where we're going to leave it, at least certainly for the time being. If we see that it's not working out great, we want to go somewhere else, we certainly can. So everybody have a great week. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time.